Good evening, Rowan. It's the 22nd of October 2016 and it's just after 1 am. And obviously, I'm making you my usual video before the weekend to reassure you I'm not going to be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. You must be really relaxed by now, because I know you're only concerned about my virtue. But obviously, you know that the reason that I'm not seducing any priests at the moment is because I know how much it infuriates you. And then, as soon as you're in prison and it doesn't matter anymore, I'm going to be with my lover. And we won't be sparing you a single thought, other than just laughing about what a loser you are right at the beginning. But apart from that, we won't be thinking about you at all. We will be having the photo of us together taken to have sent to you in prison, but that's about it. So anyway, I thought this evening I could just comment on a couple of the political situations that you mentioned in your talk at St Martin in the Fields on the 1st of October 2016, which was about ethics, empathy and peacemaking. That was the title anyway, something like that. And so I have already made a very long video about it, demonstrating how psychopaths can't learn. So you're talking about Sudan, South Sudan principally, and Syria. And I have already made quite a long video about Syria, but I've put this information again in this video, which is other people talking about the situation in Syria and what led to the war there. And also how you're involved, you personally, with one of the key players in this, that you're completely enmeshed in the globalist control matrix, in this instance with your interfaith enterprises, which I've also made videos about in the past, and how you're working to bring in a one world religion of environmentalism and earth worship. That's not in this video, but your interfaith enterprises, only one of them, comes up later in this video, and how that involves you with one of the key players in the Syrian war. So there's some video clips there to demonstrate that. And then there's also some information about South Sudan, because you're presenting the mainstream narrative that the people in South Sudan just can't get on with each other, and that's why there's this war going on, which is completely false and is nothing but propaganda. But you only ever provide propaganda for bogus terrorist activities, false flag attacks, the global warming hoax, and how we need a one world government, and everybody in the non-Western world is completely incompetent to manage their lives, and needs people in the West to be paying massive amount of taxes to be given to governments in the third world so they can be hiring armies and oppressing the people even more. So you're presenting this narrative. You're involved with NGOs to a great degree, lobbying for them in Parliament and on the boards of them and this kind of thing, and then travelling to different parts of the world, which you always did as Archbishop of Canterbury, and you'd come back with these tales of woe from the third world. And you do mention South Sudan quite a lot, actually, and you have been there a couple of times, and then you come back, and of course you just spout in the mainstream narrative that the people just can't seem to get on with each other, and there's no particular reason for it. So there's a little bit of information about that there at the end of the video, and you are making personally directed comments in this, as well, as usual, talking about communities being embedded. You talk about space and making spaces for people to come together and stuff like that. I have put a clip of that at the end of the video as well. And then you're talking about the only solution to issues of conflict is with the other. And this moves you very deeply, and things are a long way from anything like resolution and peace. So you kind of aim in personal remarks again, I think, through the medium of these conflict-ridden areas of the world. But as I've said many times, there's going to be no reconciliation. I'm not having anything to do with you, ever. And as soon as you're in prison, I won't be sparing you a second thought. So you keep on dreaming about it if you want, but rest assured that that is a fantasy. There's no relationship between us. There's never been any relationship between us, and there never will be any relationship between us. It's all in your head. And everything you've done and put me through to try and force me to involve myself with you has all been a total waste of time. And it's just shown you up for the psychopathic, narcissist, and sexual predator that you are. And obviously, it's also given me all this time off work to be researching you and all your shady activities. So, you've hoisted your own petard. Anyway, I shan't talk anymore because it is late, and I have already put these clips together, so I'm going to upload this video now, and then you can look at all this video once again, which demonstrates how you're generally talking bollocks about everything and you're completely enmeshed in the globalist control matrix. So I will be turning up to arrest you in my steel toe caps, which I've been polishing every day still, just in case you want me to kick you in the balls. I'm a bit disappointed that you haven't tipped me the wink to come and kick you in the balls, because I'm really, really dying to kick you in the balls. And since you're into S&M, I thought you'd probably like that. So it's a win-win situation. So I'm really disappointed that you haven't invited me to come and kick you in the balls. So I'll be looking out for you to tip me the wink. And when I turn up to arrest you, just give me a nod if you'd like me to kick you in the balls as well, because I'd be more than happy to oblige. So don't forget to be alert. Don't forget to be alert and keep practicing the Yorkshire puddings. And I need to go to sleep now so I can be dreaming about my beloved all night long, because he's just so sexy and handsome and wonderful and a brilliant theologian and has such a lovely personality and a sexy North Wales accent. He's nothing like you at all. Hasta la próxima.
When we look at Syria, the case is even worse. But of course, the conflict in Syria is what it is partly because we have larger global conflicts played out in Syria's environment. We don't simply have local conflict. We have wider rivalries which are enacted by proxy. We have that deep mutual suspicion between Russia and Western Europe or the United States, which continually, for all sorts of understandable reasons, poisons attempts at imposing and maintaining a ceasefire. We don't have a coherent, inhibiting, peacekeeping force around to guarantee some space, some time.
Hello, I'm John J. DeGioia, the president of Georgetown University, and I'm joined by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend Dr. Rowan Williams, to discuss the Building Bridges seminar. Archbishop Williams, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You're at Georgetown for the 9th annual Building Bridges seminar. Could you please tell us something about the origins of the initiative in Christian-Muslim dialogue?
The origin of the seminar was really around the time of the aftermath of 9/11, when a number of people in the UK, including my predecessor, Archbishop Carey, felt it was time to take a decisive new initiative about opening up conversation between the Christian and the Muslim worlds. That was the origin. originally a small, fairly select group of people for a brief conference. It's grown over the years into a much more serious, engaged, protracted thing.
I understand that after the first seminar, you've chaired all of the 8 following seminars, each of them lasting 3 days, involving many different locations around the world. This has been a major commitment on your part. Could you explain why you've seen building bridges as such a priority?
People occasionally ask, what is it that building bridges contributes to the Christian-Muslim dialogue that other kinds of dialogue don't? And for me, it's been the very distinctive experience of working together on texts that we're all reading, including our scriptural texts, creating a kind of common world of reference and understanding through reading texts together, and all the intimacy and ease of conversation that comes out of that kind of experience. It's mattered to me because that's been the experience of it. That's been the distinctive contribution that I think this seminar makes and others don't. There are seminars, there are consultations and dialogues that perhaps address matters of practical concern very immediately, how we cooperate on the challenges that face us all. There are grassroots exchanges such as we have in the Christian-Muslim Forum in the UK. But this, I think, dealing with scholars who are used to dealing with texts, I think that's a good model. I like to think that the Building Bridges seminar is doing something slightly subversive. A lot of people at the moment
As the United States moves closer to military intervention in Syria, new details are emerging that point to a surprising source for the weapons that were used in the recent chemical attack: Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia. This is the GRTV feature interview with our special guest, Pepe Escobar. And I want to draw people's attention specifically to an article that was on Asia Times last month that I think was pretty prescient in that it predicted that the status quo would have to be changed pretty soon. And that was an article called War Against Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And this concentrates on something that I think is a much more reasonable idea for what this is really about, other than a chemical weapons attack. And that is the pipelines. As we've talked about on this program before, a lot of this comes down to the pipeline politics that is increasingly hardwiring geopolitical relations onto the grand chessboard. And this is no exception, with a memorandum of understanding having recently been signed between Iran, Iraq, and Syria for a new gas pipeline that really could potentially change the game if it was allowed to proceed. Let's tell people about this pipeline and this memorandum of understanding that was just signed.
Okay, this is absolutely essential. It's the Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline, which even in some parts of the Middle East, they call it, with a little bit of sense of humor, in fact, the Islamic pipeline. Not exactly, right? But this is absolutely essential for 2 reasons. One, it bypasses 2 of the nations who are absolutely keen on regime change in Syria: Turkey and Qatar. The whole thing with Qatar, as we all know, changed completely for the past few weeks, in fact, for the past 2 months. Don't forget that until 2 months ago, Qatar was being hailed all over, not only in the Middle East, but even some parts of Europe and in DC, as the next mini superpower. They were everywhere. Their foreign policy was everywhere. Their cash was everywhere. They were buying everything legally, like real estate in London and Paris, and illegally, like mercenaries all over the Middle East to fight in Syria. But then the emir is gone. He deposes himself, which is a story that is absolutely impossible to confirm with any official sources in Doha. But we can get around it. We can talk to people in Iraq. We can talk to people in the Emirates, traveling Saudis, you name it. And the picture is that essentially he was invited to depose himself because of Saudi pressure. This Saudi pressure was applied by Bandar Bush, Bandar bin Sultan, former ambassador in Washington, the capo of the Al-Qapi in the Afghan jihad in the 1980s, very close to the Bush family in the Carlyle group. We all know this story. So Bandar Bush was not dead. We thought that he had been dead for a year. We all remember that, since that attempt against him in July 2012. He resurfaced 1 year later, and his first photo 1 year later is shaking the hands of Vladimir Putin in Moscow. This is a story that I think a lot of people are already familiar with. The famous 4-hour and something meeting between Bandar and Putin, where essentially Bandar was trying to sell to Putin the idea that if you start opposing a UN resolution, a UN Security Council resolution, and he backed off in terms of supporting Assad, well, the Saudis would start buying, for starters, $15 billion in Russian weapons, with more contracts following. They would not interfere with, very important, pipelines, with Russian pipelines going to Europe, which means basically the Nord Stream and the South Stream, so which is ridiculous. And Putin already said that to Bandar straight away, look, we don't have a problem with that, unless you sabotage our pipelines, right? And obviously, after 4.5 hours, when he was not getting what he wanted, which was Putin's, okay, Assad is toast, he said, and this is quoted verbatim from the leak. The leak was from a Russian diplomat. You went to, very funny, you went to an Arabic newspaper first, Al-Safir in Lebanon, then it was translated into English, and then it was circulating all over. It's a completely crazy story. But it makes portions of the dialogue make sense completely, considering the way Bandar articulates himself and Putin's responses as well. Bandar, in the end, to sum it all up, he said, look, there's going to be a problem for you with the Sochi Olympics. I'm going to release the jihadis that we control. He said blatantly, we control all these Chechens. And not only the Chechens who are in Syria or trafficking between Iraq and Syria, but the Chechens in the Caucasus itself. And Bandar says explicitly, we run all these people, just like he ran 98% of the Mujahideen in the 80s in Afghanistan. So, on the other hand, they had an agreement on Egypt, because Putin is very much afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood, all over, supported by Qatar, obviously. So getting rid of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was okay for Russia. But this Assad business, forget it. The pipeline business, completely stupid, because Russia is in control of all this. They have strategic partnership with Germany. They're building Nord Stream and the South Stream. There's no way the Saudis are going to interfere with that. And they don't even have gas to sell to Europe. Qatar has gas to sell to Europe. And that's the introduction for us to start talking about Iran, Iraq, Syria pipeline. So in the end, Bandar threatened Putin, saying, literally, there's only a military solution for Syria left. This is what we are watching now. So this is the Saudi part of the BBB axis, let's put it this way. Bandar, Bibi, and Barry Obama. It's the 3B axis, in fact. And this joke is, by the way, circulating all over the Middle East already, you know. So, what happened with Qatar? So, with Bandar pushing, pressing, especially the Obama administration, telling, look, Qatar, it's ridiculous. In a phone call, he actually said, Qatar is 300 people at the TV station. which is not very far from the truth. You know, I go to Qatar every year, and that's it. And the people that I talk to, that I get information from, are Egyptian documentary filmmakers, Somali guards. Never anybody from the government is going to ask me my questions. Never. Oh, answer my question. Never. So anyway, Bandar impressed to the to the Obama administration. Look, I am in charge now. King Abdullah told me that I have free hand in Syria. I'm the director of Saudi intelligence. I'm going to run this whole show, and I don't want these upstarts from Qatar. They have to be out. This explains why the Syrian National Council, or Council from Above, all the name that they have this week, with the guy that is in charge this week before he resigns. We don't even know who these people are anymore. These are out of the picture. So now it's Bandar running the show. This explains a lot of what's going on now, including the possibility of a false flag. Because Bandar is running not only, I would say, not Salafi jihadis, but Salafis or hardcore Wahhabis, but also Salafi jihadis as well, and even connecting with the Jabhat al-Nusra al-Qaeda in Iraq gangs as well. Considering that, last month in Baghdad, they dismantled a cell fabricating chemical weapons, in fact. This was the Iraqi Minister of Defense and the Iraqi Minister of Interior. They announced that over a month ago. So the way I see this false flag, they introduced some of these jihadis to a place in northeast of Damascus, already occupied by the Free Syrian Army and the collection of gangs in the opposition, since June, by the way, and that's where the rockets originated, probably DIY rockets. And this is what the UN inspectors should be evaluating now, before, it's crazy. They're forced to leave this Saturday. So they had less than a week to conduct an extremely complicated investigation that the Russians, when they conducted their own investigation concerning a chemical weapons attack last March, it took them 3 months for the investigation, 1 month to organize the report, and then they went to the UN and they presented the report. You can easily find the link on the net with Vitaly Churkin, UN ambassador, Russian ambassador at the UN, his press conference about it. So, Qatar was completely marginalized, and Qatar's agenda from the beginning regarding Syria had everything to do with this pipeline. So imagine a pipeline originating in the South Pars gas fields, largest gas field in the world, shared by Iran and Qatar. So originating the Iranian part, then traversing Iraq, then traversing Syria, ending in the Eastern Mediterranean, probably near Latakia or Tartus, or one of them, or a new naval terminal between both of them, probably with an extension to Lebanon as well. Customers, European Union, once again, shooting themselves at their feet, which is their #1 sport. Same old story. I think we discussed already that, James. What I've been listening every time I go to Brussels for the past, 10 years, 12 years, whatever. Gazprom, we are hostages of Gazprom. If only you could have a deal with the Iranians. They can't because of the U.S. sanctions. And obviously they don't want to antagonize the U.S. This would be the perfect situation for the European Union. They say they have an energy policy. They don't. For their energy policy to be coordinated with Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and get the gas from this pipeline, considering they're never going to get gas from Turkmenistan or from Azerbaijan. The problem is that the whole situation now changed because Qatar is out of the picture. We know the pipeline is not going to be built with a war situation. The same thing applies to the TAPI pipeline through Afghanistan for the past 15 years, right? And at the same time, with the Saudis controlling all this and threatening Putin at the same time, the whole thing is muddled. Because the Saudis, they don't have an alternative pipeline to propose to Europe because they don't have enough gas. Qatar has enough gas. So the Saudis and the Qataris now, they were more or less, there was a rapprochement for 2 years or so, and now they're completely divergent because their agendas are different. The Qataris support the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Saudis feared and despised the Muslim Brotherhood to death. So in Syria, the scenario for Bandar, ideally, would be Syria transformed into a sort of emirate, a Wahhabi predominantly emirate controlled by Sunnis, with the Sunni business classes in Damascus allied with Riyadh, and would be a sort of dependency of Saudi Arabia, just like Egypt is nowadays. Now that King Abdullah in Riyadh is paying the bills, basically, of the new Egyptian government. So as you can see, the whole thing is completely muddled, but the pipeline Stunt angle is still there.
For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com. The Center for Research on Globalization depends on your support. To purchase a book or DVD, or to make a donation, please visit globalresearch.ca today.
I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight and for the possibility to address some words to you about the present global geopolitical situation. After the brutal military action in Libya to destroy that country, not just Gaddafi, but that country, the U.S. decided to move on to Syria. This is a long-term plan. It's been on the Pentagon war map for at least a decade, to change the political map of the Middle East. And they thought they could roll into Syria on the momentum of Libya and destroy the al-Assad regime and bring in a Muslim Brotherhood opposition in Syria. Well, Syria is a country, if you look on the map behind me, it's a country with many different religious minorities. Druze, Sunni is the majority, Alawite is a minority, Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite, his wife is a Sunni, and you have the Kurds. For many, many years, Syrian friends of mine have assured me, all different religious groups lived together side by side in a society that was basically secular. There was no Alawite belief being forced on the Sunni majority by al-Assad or his father. And suddenly Syria was under attack. Now, if you go to the next slide, the next overhead, you'll see the critical location of Syria geopolitically in the Middle East. Syria borders Turkey, it borders Israel, it borders Lebanon, it borders Iraq. And in 2011, Bashar al-Assad's government signed a contract with the government of Iran and the government of Iraq to build a gas pipeline from the South Pars gas field, the largest gas field known in the world today, so that Iran could market its gas through Iraq, whose prime minister is a Shia Muslim, and through Syria, whose prime minister is an Alawite, but on friendly terms with both Iraq and with Iran. Iranian natural gas potentially, ultimately, into the European market, either through port locations in Syria or through Lebanon. Now, it begins at this point to get very geopolitically complicated, but basically, when that agreement was announced by the Syrian government, the US and NATO allies organized a massive, dramatic escalation of the destruction of the al-Assad regime, accusing al-Assad of terrorism, accusing him of civilian atrocities, everything, the usual playbook that is used by the State Department to demonize anyone they don't like. But in reality, the factor of this new pipeline created a major geopolitical challenge, not just to the United States, but interestingly enough, to Israel, which in 2010 had discovered a huge, for the first time in Israeli history since 1948, a huge offshore gas field called Leviathan in the eastern Mediterranean. And Israel began nursing ambitions of becoming an energy superpower, tiny little Israel, which hadn't had any energy to speak of its own until then. So together with an American company, Noble Energy, an Israeli-American consortium began developing the Leviathan field, and another Middle East country called Qatar also began emerging as a major exporter of liquefied natural gas from another part of the field in the Persian Gulf that's adjoining to the Iranian field. Unfortunately, I don't have a map to show that. But the same gas field that was discovered in Iranian exclusive economic zone waters in the Persian Gulf extends over to Qatar. And the Qataris, with the help of the British energy companies, developed the liquefied natural gas technology to market this to Asia and ultimately to Western Europe. So, not surprisingly, much of the financing for the mercenaries, and they're not opposition for the most part. These are mercenaries. I was in Tehran in February of this year and interviewed a number of journalists who'd spent months all across Syria interviewing mercenaries, Al-Qaeda, and others fighting against the regime. They are paid $100 a day, which is a king's fortune for many of these poor, unemployed people from they're coming from Chechnya, they're coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, where they had excellent combat experience. And they're given Kalashnikovs and $100 a day and told to go in from the Turkish border into Iraq and create terror. And that through the chaos and terror, they're told, we'll back you up and create a regime change against this evil Bashar al-Assad regime. So the financing to the tune of some $5 billion for these mercenary terrorists came from the Emir of Qatar. The Emir of Qatar also houses the headquarters internationally of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it shouldn't be surprising that the leadership of the Syrian opposition, so-called, are all Muslim Brotherhood, or most of them.
I have no first-hand experience of mediation in the context of Syria, nor, sadly, have many other people. I have slightly more first-hand experience in regard to South Sudan. And thinking back to encounters in South Sudan a couple of years ago, what comes to mind most vividly is the memory of listening to people saying, this is a conflict about nothing but power. It's not a conflict about any subject except who controls. That's what makes it so hard. But those in the South Sudan Council of Churches who continued to engage with very little result with the two leaders of the factions were repeatedly trying to create an environment in which it was possible for the leaders of these two factions to speak not just about control, but about the good and security of the communities in which they were embedded, to try and push them again and again towards that sense that if they were battling to make sure that there would never be any insecurity for themselves and their colleagues ever again, The only answer to that fear and insecurity was with the other. The patience, the time-taking, and the courage of those who continued to seek ways of constructing those contexts still moves me very deeply. It's still a long way from anything like resolution or peace.
Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your Sunday update from the Center for Research on Globalization at globalresearch.ca for the 17th day of July 2011. And now for the real news. The world welcomed a new nation to the international community last week as South Sudan officially became its own country. Obtaining independence from Sudan on July 9th, the Republic of South Sudan became the 193rd member state of the United Nations in a General Assembly vote earlier this week, and Africa's first new country since Eritrea became an independent state in 1993. So far, coverage of the story in the Western establishment media has unproblematically portrayed the creation of South Sudan as the hard-won fruit of a valiant and spontaneous liberation movement among the southern, mainly Christian and animist population, who have been engaged in a decades-long struggle against the mostly Arab north, where embattled President Omar al-Bashir has been broadly criticized for his rule. He was indicted last year by the International Criminal Court for genocide in the Darfur region. However, critics and independent journalists note that Sudan has long been the victim of outside interference by Western powers with financial interests in the vast resource wealth of the region. They allege that mainstream Western press about South Sudan has gone out of its way to find human interest angles in the story that are conspicuously free of historical context or geopolitical analysis. Britain's Telegraph newspaper ran a story on Tuesday noting that South Sudan will be able to take part in the London 2012 Olympics, but face a race against time to do so under their own flag. The Daily Star out of Lebanon ran an entire article devoted to how a wildlife preserve hopes to attract more tourists now that the South is its own country. The Washington Times posted a feature story about Chicago Bulls forward Luol Deng traveling to South Sudan to host the country's first post-independence basketball clinic. The New York Times ran a lengthy report about South Sudan's independence celebrations, providing great detail about the festivities, the personal experiences of random Sudanese, and a lengthy list of the foreign dignitaries in attendance. But, as independent journalist Russ Baker notes in an essay criticizing such reporting, the Times does not even mention the question of South Sudan's primary resource until the 24th paragraph of their article, when they note, "Negotiators have yet to agree on a formula to split the revenue from the South's oil fields, which have kept the economy of both southern and northern Sudan afloat." The effect of these reports are to downplay one of the central questions behind the decades-long strife in the region, and obscure what many are alleging is a history of Western interventionism in the name of the region's strategic, mineral, and economic interests. Only ever mentioned as a backdrop to the hostilities that have been the hallmark of the Sudan in recent years, oil accounts for between 70 and 90% of the region's exports. Sudan is the third largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa, and according to a 2008 BP Statistical Energy Survey, it had proven oil reserves of over 6.6 billion barrels at the end of 2007. Now, as much as 85% of those reserves are believed to lie in the newly created Republic of South Sudan, reserves whose fate are now in question as the region's treaties and agreements are rewritten by a new government. Throughout the 1990s, China has invested massively in the region's oil deposits, including the construction of a 1,000-kilometer-long pipeline to pump Sudanese oil to Chinese ships anchored in the Red Sea. By the time of separation, China had become Sudan's largest trading partner, buying 40% of Sudan's oil. But with the creation of the new government in the south, that looks set to change. The South Sudanese Central Bank has been formally cleared from the U.S. sanctions that prevent American businesses from dealing with the Sudanese Central Bank. Just this week, the new South Sudanese government announced that they have launched a joint venture with Glencore, the world's largest commodities trading company, to develop the country's vast oil wealth. As longtime observers of the region are now noting, these latest moves belie the fact that all of the Western attention on this region over the past decades, including economic, financial, military, and even humanitarian interest in Darfur, have been tied to the vast potential wealth of the country, and the creation of a new, Western-friendly government was the geopolitical endgame all along. to learn more about the story behind the story of the creation of South Sudan. The Corbett Report talked last week to Keith Harmon Snow, a writer, photographer, humanitarian campaigner, and award-winning journalist who has been writing about Western interventionism in Sudan for several years.
Well, to call South Sudan an independent nation is a little bit, what should we say, erroneous. It's an American protectorate. It's a British-American-Israeli protectorate at this point. It's run by the Christian right. It's run by the American intelligence establishment and big corporations and some private military companies. For example, Philippe, I believe his first name is Philippe Heilberg from Larch Capital. Larch Capital has got some big investors. It's an investment firm, and they own at present, if you want to use the word own, they have acquired 400,000 hectares of land in South Sudan, which they will use for their mining, agricultural, corporate interests, private operations. First thing to do is probably to kick the people off if they're not already being kicked off or have been kicked off through the war. In any case, Larch Capital, this guy Philippe Heilberg is a Wall Street investment banker. And how did they come about owning or controlling 400,000 hectares? I mean, that's a pretty good size. That's the size of Vermont. In the region of South Sudan and Darfur is massive oil. And this is a very, very significant sized country to begin with. And we're talking about an awful, awful lot of oil. And copper, uranium, gum arabic is fundamental to South Sudan and Darfur. It's the best quality gum arabic in the world, and the largest proportion, I think it's over 2/3 of world supply, is found in Sudan. And people ask, what is gum arabic? Coca-Cola and Pepsi can't be made without gum arabic. Coca-Cola got a special exemption. The United States Pentagon, United States Department has had sanctions against the government of Sudan for many years because we've been participating in a war there, partly, but to prevent American corporations from having any investments or operations in Sudan. And one of the only major corporations to be exempted from the sanctions was Coca-Cola, because they needed their gum arabic to come out of Sudan. And going back to the gum arabic thing, many people eat or like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which is supposedly, this green company. Ben & Jerry's is owned by Unilever now, and Unilever gets its gum arabic from Sudan. So those are just a few of the interests. The agricultural productivity of Sudan is fantastic. And so we're going to, a lot of monocropping and a lot of big plantations being put in by agribusiness. And in order to get to this, there was a 20-year-long war that basically killed off millions and millions of people. Nothing as extreme as the Congo, but pretty extreme. Meaning in the Congo, we've seen 10 million dead in 14 years. And in Sudan, it was around 6, I think the numbers are 6 to 7 million dead in 20 years.
Allegations that foreign intervention in the Sudan was geared towards the establishment of a Western-friendly government in the region appear to be vindicated by developments since the creation of the new state. During independence celebrations, South Sudanese revelers were seen to be carrying Israeli flags, a reflection of Israel's active support for the South in opposition to the Arab government in Khartoum throughout the period of civil strife. Israel has now officially recognized the government of South Sudan in its capital, Juba, and Juba has reciprocated by saying it wants to help Israel in forging a Middle East peace deal. The South Sudan government also launched its own currency this week, the South Sudanese pound, which was printed in Germany and flown into the country yesterday. As a testament to the willingness of the South Sudanese to subject themselves to the economic subjugation of the Western-led international financial order, the government in Juba applied for IMF membership back in April, before it had even officially gained independence from Sudan, a country with which the IMF has historically had a rocky relationship. Now, as tensions flare up once again between Sudan and South Sudan over control of disputed oil-rich areas of the region which are still in a territorial gray zone, and as UN peacekeeping forces flood into the region to ostensibly make sure that those tensions do not fly out of control, look for the establishment media to continue to provide contextless, fact-free reporting on issues of no significance whatsoever, and to unwaveringly side with the Western-friendly South over the Chinese-friendly North in every dispute over resources. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.
Where there is profound, ongoing, and deeply irrational conflict, as in Syria, as in South Sudan. That's the time when other forces, other authorities come in, not to resolve the problem, but to see if any spaces and times can be created in which the interests of different groups can be spoken out, questioned, tested. Some of you may have seen a book about the formation of character by David Brooke of the New York Times, in which he picks out a number of people in the United States particularly, whose engagement with civil rights issues and other public questions of justice has been of that character. He mentions the great Catholic anarchist Dorothy Day as a cardinal example of this kind of deliberately baffling, at an angle, response to violence and injustice.
Why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.